Okay, so today we are looking at different kinds of discourses. We've come quite a distance from the beginning of the course. I am hoping that by now, or at this stage, you have trained yourself in identifying the various types of speech acts. And then you've done something about definitions and problems with definitions. So today we are going to look at types of discourses, and to help ourselves, we would begin by going back to the course outline. I'm sure right now you should be familiar with this course outline, and every one of you should have a copy of it. Now, I think we should spare ourselves from going, all the way down from the beginning of the course outline. Let's just go straight away to what we have today. So today we are looking at Unit 3 and some parts of Unit 5. And so what we're looking at is contrasting types of discourse, and then the 6 senses of law. And so without wasting time, let's just kick it off. So types of discourses. Sorry, I just want to put it on full screen. So what is a discourse? What do we mean by a discourse? Sometimes when we write, we put individual sentences together for different purposes. A collection of sentences is called a passage or discourse. So a discourse, which we also call a passage, is nothing but a collection of sentences. We shall distinguish passages that are arguments and those that are not. So in distinguishing types of passages, you already begin to see that there are 2 broad categories of passages or discourses. We have the ones that are argumentative, and then we have the rest. Now let's look at argument. A discourse is called an argument if it contains a claim or conclusion that is supported with reasons or information. So that's what an argument is. If a discourse or a passage is an argument, it has to contain a claim or conclusion. And you need to note that we regard claims and conclusions as the same. And when you see them, you also have to see that they are supported with reasons or information. So the first thing to identify in a passage, if it is an argument, or the first thing that tells you that a passage is an argument, is to see that there is a certain claim or conclusion. And then you also see that it is supported with reasons or information. If you just find a claim and there are no supporting reasons, then it is not an argument. Okay, proceeding from there. An argument contains at least 2 items: a conclusion, which could also be a claim or decision, and then expressions aiming or aimed at providing support or proof for the conclusion, claim, or decision. So just like I said, these 2 items have to be in a passage or a discourse to classify such a passage or discourse as an argument. Example of argument. Now we have 3 statements here. 1, Ghanaian men think women don't deserve to occupy high positions. 2, they question the competence and qualification of women who are sent to high office, but refrain from doing same to even incompetent men. 3, therefore, Ghanaian men do not respect women. So we have 3 statements. Notice that the above passage has 3 statements. Statements 1 and 2 are serving as information, evidence, or reasons to support statement 3. For attempting to support statement 3, these 2 first statements are called premises. Statement 3, which is being supported, is called conclusion. Now, how do we identify arguments? Here we're looking at identifying arguments. First of all, we have what we call the premise indicators. There are certain words you see that tell you immediately that you are looking at a premise, a statement that is a premise. When you see certain words or phrases, such as for, granted that, in view of the fact that, in as much as, since, it is a fact that, one cannot doubt that, because, the reason is that, as shown by the fact that. Now, these words or phrases appear in certain sentences, and noticing them immediately tells you that you are looking at a premise or a sentence that is offering reason to believe another sentence that is a conclusion. We call them premise indicators. But it is not a must. Not all premises contain premise indicators. So we need to learn to identify premises even when they don't have these phrases. But let's move on. There are also conclusion indicators. When you see certain words or phrases like therefore, consequently, hence, asserting that, for this reason, accordingly, consequently, this being so. These are words or phrases that tell you you are looking at a statement that is a conclusion, or you are looking at a conclusion. But like I said, not all premises and conclusions contain premise and conclusion indicators. In fact, when we are setting your assessments and your tests, you don't see such things in our argumentative passages. Then let's go to non-arguments. Not every passage or cluster of propositions is an argument. But before we get here, there's something I want us to see. Like you just saw the premise and conclusion indicators, we can actually run a test of these indicators by going back to our example of an argument. Now you can see that statements 1 and 2 are premises. Now look at statements 1 and 2 carefully. Look at statement 1. Go to the premise indicators. You can pick up any of those premise indicators, and then so we can pick up any of the premise indicators and and plant it here. So let's go to one premise indicator. Let's pick the second one, granted that. Now, granted that Ghanaian men think women don't deserve to occupy high positions. And then in view of the fact that they question the competence and qualification of women who are sent to high office, but refrain from doing same to even incompetent men. So you can plant premise indicators here. And then you go to statement 3, you see that there is already a conclusion indicator there. You have therefore. But you can replace that with any other of the conclusion indicators. So for instance, let's go to conclusion indicators and bring some other indicator, like consequently. So we go back and say, consequently, Ghanaian men do not respect women. So that's how it works. All right, so let's go to non-arguments. Not every passage or cluster of propositions is an argument. Some passages are non-arguments. They include narratives, instructional passages, rhetorical polemic, or opinion. So we'll look at this three very briefly. Narrative. A narrative is a passage that reports the sequence of events according to the order the events occurred. Example, over the course of 2 weeks, some police officers have been observed stopping and checking cars in the area between Sawam and Anyinam on the Accra-Kumasi road. They extort money and abuse motorists who question their authority. Brandishing AK-47 assault rifles and dressed in heavy police gear. These officers do not just check cars, they also assault some motorists and passengers. And so, when you look at this passage, you realize it is a narrative. Now let's go to the next instructional passage. This is a passage that describes a process or sequence of things to do in a specific order. It offers a list of directives to accomplish some desired effects. The example below offers a list of directives on how to use a fire extinguisher. Example: pull the pin, aim the nozzle at the base of the fire. Aiming at the top of the flame with the extinguisher won't be effective. In a controlled manner, squeeze the trigger to release the agent. Sweep the nozzle from side to side until the fire is put out. So that's a typical example of an instructional passage. So instructional passages are collections of imperatives. You remember we did imperatives and we saw the nature of imperatives. So instructional passages are collections of imperatives. Now let's go to the next. Rhetorical polemic. A rhetorical polemic is a passage communicating a usually strong feeling. A passage communicating a usually strong feeling and persuasively venting an opinion. So when you see a passage communicating a usually strong feeling, it is a rhetorical polemic. Usually it could also contain a claim or claims, but such a claim or claims would normally be surrounded with emotive expressions. And a rhetorical polemic is a collection of emotive expressions. Just like an instructional passage is a collection of imperatives, a rhetorical polemic is a collective of emotive expressions. In the case of a rhetorical polemic, you could find occasionally a claim or claims among the rhetorical, the emotive expressions. So let's look at an example. I hate these lab tests. Every time I'm exposed to the disease plants, I fall ill. I'm sure they hate me, or they are punishing me or something. It's disgusting how I get sick so often. So you look at this collection of statements, you see that most of them are emotive expressions, and probably there could be a claim among them. To start with the first statement, I hate these lab tests. That's an emotive expression, obviously. Every time I'm exposed to the disease plants, I fall ill. That's a claim. That's a claim. I'm sure they hate me or they are punishing me or something. That's an emotive expression. It's disgusting how I get sick so often. That's an emotive expression. So you have at least 3 emotive expressions that are surrounding a claim. You know, it's not a must that you find claims in rhetorical polemics, but usually you find them. You know. Now let's exercise our minds a little. Name 4 types of discourses studied in this chapter. So we have what? Argument, narrative, instructional passage, and rhetorical polemic. What is an argument? An argument is a passage containing a conclusion or claim supported with reasons or information, supported by premises expressing reasons or conveying information. Then list the components of an argument. You have 2 components, conclusion or claim, and then premises. Distinguish between argument and rhetorical polemic. This one is interesting. Distinguish between argument and rhetorical polemic. An argument is a passage containing a conclusion or claim surrounded with premises bearing reasons or informations to support the conclusion or claim. And then a rhetorical polemic is a passage containing emotive expressions that quite often includes a claim or claims. Okay. Now we come to verbal and real disputes. You might have done this when you were going through a lecture on definitions, but we could just quickly run through it and then get to our next topic. A verbal dispute is a disagreement about the meaning of a word or words. Example, that man is a Fante, no, he's an Akan. Another example, she is a Christian because she receives Holy Communion. No, she's not a Christian because she does not speak in tongues. You know. Now, let's look at the first example. That man is a Fante, no, he's an Akan. Why is there a disagreement? There's a disagreement because one of the persons in this argument doesn't know that a Fante is an Akan. You see, the person who made the second statement doesn't know that a Fante is an Akan. If he knew that a Fante is also an Akan, then this argument would not exist. So that's why we call it a verbal dispute or a verbal disagreement. It's just a disagreement about the meaning of a word or words. We don't regard it as a real disagreement or a real dispute. You simply dissolve it by clarifying the meaning of a word or words. So that's the meaning of verbal dispute or disagreement. And then the real dispute or real disagreements, we call them the substantive disagreements or substantive disputes. Example 1, Accra is the capital of Ghana. No, Kumasi is the capital of Ghana. So real disputes are disagreements over facts or values. They are factual or value-based disagreements. Example 1 is a factual disagreement. Accra is the capital of Ghana. No, Kumasi is the capital of Ghana. That's a factual disagreement. You know, you might think that this kind of disagreement is not possible because all of you know the capital of Ghana. But if, for instance, we're arguing about the capital of Seychelles or Myanmar, then you will see that factual disagreements are possible. Example 2, Accra should be the capital of Ghana. No, Accra should not be the capital of Ghana. So there you see a disagreement in value judgments, a value disagreement, value-based disagreement. One person believes Accra should be the capital of Ghana, and the other person believes Accra should not be the capital of Ghana. So these 2 examples, an example of a factual disagreement and another example of a value-based disagreement, they are examples of real dispute or real disagreement. So these are what we call the real disagreements in critical thinking. Okay, let's exercise ourselves a bit. Determine whether the following disagreement is verbal or real. Sandra says, that man is quite old. He died at 50. And then Comfort says, you call that old? He died young. Okay, so is this a verbal or real disagreement? To find out which disagreement it is, you look closely at what is at stake, what is being contested. Sandra believes that someone who dies at 50 is quite old, but Comfort believes that 50 is not old. You see? So that means that the disagreement is about what it means to be old. So it's a verbal dispute, a verbal disagreement. Now let's, at this point, we can take a look at the next topic, the normative and the empirical. Here we'll recap some of the things we did about the differences between facts and values. So in this session, we'll round up our analysis of the difference between values and facts. Values are about what we should or should not do, and facts are about what is or is not. Sometimes we mistake values for facts. And there are factual statements with implicit value judgments. Examples. Look at the difference between the following two statements. The president has lifted a lockdown. The president has rightly lifted the lockdown. The first is a factual statement. The second is like the first, but with an implicit value judgment represented by the word rightly. The second is therefore a value judgment. You see, just because the second contains the word rightly, the second becomes a value judgment and no longer a factual statement. Rightly is a value judgment. To insert the word rightly means that the person who uttered the second statement believes the president is right to have lifted the lockdown. So that means the statement is altogether a different thing. It is no longer a factual statement. It has become a value judgment. So the lesson is that we should look out for both the explicit and implicit meanings of statements. When you see a statement, first of all, get the explicit meaning of the statement. But secondly, you also have to look out for the implicit meaning of the statement. Without confirming these two kinds of meanings of a statement, you could be misled. So you could see how important this distinction is to our business of thinking critically. Then we'll move over to metaphors and proverbs. Crucial to logical reasoning is the need to single out expressions that should not be interpreted literally. Two of such kinds of expressions are metaphors and proverbs. There are expressions that we shouldn't interpret literally. We shouldn't interpret on their face value. Two examples of such expressions are metaphors and proverbs. So we need to know what they are in order to know how to handle them as logicians. Metaphors are sentences that should not be interpreted literally. Examples. Don't judge a book by its cover. We don't judge this sentence literally. It means don't evaluate things just by looking at their appearances. That's what it means. It's raining cats and dogs means it is raining heavily. Of course, you know cats and dogs cannot descend from the sky. Then we have a proverb, a sentence with a literal meaning as well as a non-literal one. And the non-literal meaning is usually a piece of advice. So that means a proverb is a multiple purpose speech act. A proverb is a speech act or a statement that is performing multiple functions. Examples. Only a fool tests the depth of a river with two of his feet. You can see that the literal meaning is correct. You don't actually test a river with two of your feet. So we can interpret it literally. We can also interpret it non-literally. And it means don't embark on a venture without a proper reflection. So it has both a literal and a non-literal meaning. Remember that is the difference between a proverb and a metaphor. You don't interpret metaphors literally, but you can interpret proverbs literally. So proverbs have both literal and non-literal meanings, and the non-literal one is usually a piece of advice. It takes a whole village to raise a child. What it means is that the community is responsible for the moral upbringing of a child. And of course, it is true that it takes a whole village to raise a child. No one can lick his or her own elbow. Of course, it's true. It's very difficult to get your elbow to your tongue, except if you are one of these circus magicians, What it usually means is that no person is an island. You need the assistance of other people in your life. That's what it means. The intentions behind proverbs. Proverbs are mostly used to advise people, but proverbs are not always sincerely used. For instance, the proverb, no one can lick his or her elbow, can be used to encourage corruption or convince someone that it is impossible to fight corruption. So let's exercise ourselves a little. Provide one example each of a metaphor and a proverb. I'll leave you to do that yourself. And then how is a metaphor different from a proverb? Like we said, a metaphor can only be interpreted in a non-literal way. We cannot interpret a proverb literally. On the other hand, a proverb can be interpreted in both literal and non-literal ways. And the non-literal interpretation is usually a piece of advice. Okay, so now let's progress to looking at meaning defects in language. In addition to metaphors and proverbs, there are expressions whose meanings are defective. Two examples of defective meaning expressions are vagueness and ambiguity. Vagueness. What is vagueness? An expression is vague when its meaning has no boundaries of application. An expression is vague when its meaning has no boundaries of application. An expression is vague when its meaning is not precise. Examples. He'll be here any moment from now. He'll be here any moment from now. So any moment from now is nowhere. It has no boundary of application. It is any time from the next second to the end of the world, or the time that Jesus Christ comes again. So that is why we say that an expression is vague when its meaning has no boundaries of application. I'll come and see your parents at the right time. At the right time has no boundary of application. You see, that car is expensive. Expensive has no boundary of application. Is the car $1 million or is it $100,000? No boundary at all. That's what makes an expression vague, if its meaning has no boundary of application. On the other hand, we have ambiguity. A sentence is ambiguous when it is capable of more than one meaning. A sentence is ambiguous when it is capable of more than one meaning. So in this case, a sentence has a clear meaning, but it is not just one clear meaning. There are two or more clear meanings. So it has a boundary of applications, but the boundaries are more than one. There is a boundary of application, or there are boundaries of application. There are three types of ambiguity. We have lexical ambiguity, referential ambiguity, and syntactic ambiguity. Let's So we're saying that if an ambiguity occurs in a single word, then it is called lexical ambiguity. This type of ambiguity usually occurs in words that have the same spelling but different meanings. The same spelling but different meanings. Such words are called homographs. Let's look at them. Examples. He lives close to the bank. He lives close to the bank. Does he live close to a river bank or a bank as a financial institution? So the word bank is a homograph. And then just imagine if you see a newspaper caption, military head, 6 arms. So the question is it the head of a military man, the biological head of a military man, or the head of the military as an institution? And then when you see the arms, is it the arms, the biological arms of a military man, or are we talking about weapons? So other homographs include race, chest, light, and so on. So a good number of words are homographs. Then we have referential ambiguity. This type of ambiguity occurs when a phrase or a word in a particular context could refer to two or more properties of things in a sentence. When a phrase or a word in a particular context could refer to two or more properties of things in a sentence. So referential ambiguity occurs from the use of pronouns and quantifiers. Let's see an example. Examples. The boy told his father about the theft case and he was very upset. Who is upset? The boy or the father? So the pronoun he does not specify which of the nouns in the sentence it is referring to. Second example, he used deceit to sell the soup to me, but I did not buy it. What did I not buy? The deceit or the soup. So here too, the pronoun it fails to specify which noun it is referring to. Then we have syntactic or sentential ambiguity. When a sentence contains two or more possible meanings. When a sentence contains two or more possible meanings, then the sentence is ambiguous. So syntactic or sentential ambiguity occurs when it is clear what the individual words in the sentence mean, but it is not clear what the whole sentence means. Examples. Today we shall be discussing violence on TV. We shall be discussing violence on TV. Is it that discussion of violence will be held on a TV program, or that violence on TV will be the topic of discussion? So that's the first example. The second example. The dean will talk about cheating in the seminar room. The dean will talk about cheating in the seminar room. Is the dean going to talk about cheating that happened in the seminar room? Or is cheating the topic of the lecture she's going to deliver in the seminar room? Okay. Now let's look at difference between vagueness and ambiguity. A vague term does not indicate a clear boundary of applying the meaning of the term. On the other hand, an ambiguous term gives us ideas of what it means, but suggests more than one accepted meaning, leaving us confused as to which of the meanings particularly is intended. So vagueness means no clear meaning. Ambiguity means more than one accepted meaning. Now let's look at the role of vagueness and ambiguity in language. Vagueness and ambiguity can facilitate equivocation and disagreement in language. The role of vagueness and ambiguity can also be found in metaphors and proverbs. So metaphors and proverbs could contain vagueness and ambiguity. Now let's look at equivocation. Equivocation occurs when someone shifts unannounced from one meaning of a word to another meaning of the same word in the same passage. So when someone is playing tricks with a homograph, we said homographs are words that are capable of more than one meaning. If someone is playing tricks with a homograph, then the person is equivocating. So this is usually done with the hope of confusing the reader. Equivocation can take advantage of ambiguity because equivocation means taking advantage of the ambiguous nature of words to persuade or confuse readers. We shall study equivocation as a form of argument later in chapter 12. Let's see some examples of equivocation. Examples. Time flies like an arrow and fruit flies like a banana. Time flies like an arrow and fruit flies like a banana. The first flies is a verb meaning moving in the air. The second flies is a noun indicating fruit insects. So the first like is used for the purpose of comparison. The second like is used as a verb indicating a preference for something. So time flies like an arrow, but fruit flies like a banana. So the two flies don't mean the same. The first fly is a verb, the verb of flying. The second fly is a noun. See, I'm celebrating my birthday in a game. I'm celebrating my birthday in a gay manner because I'm gay. So the word gay is used in different ways. The first use of gay means happiness. The second means the state of being homosexual. Strategy for identifying equivocation. First of all, ascertain whether a word has been used more than once in the sentence or passage. If you notice that a word has been used more than once in a sentence or a passage, then the next thing is to proceed to check if the word or expression has different meanings in the sentence or passage. If you're able to make these two observations, then the sentence or passage contains equivocation. Now let's look at the importance of identifying equivocation. Note that vagueness, ambiguity, and equivocation are very important in clarifying arguments. Vagueness, ambiguity, and equivocation are very important in clarifying arguments. If certain expressions are vague or ambiguous in an argument, their meaning needs to be clarified before we can proceed to evaluate the argument. So when you are clarifying arguments, you first of all need to clarify without all the vagueness and ambiguity and equivocation in an argument before we even begin to examine the argument. So a little exercise, determine whether each of the following is vague or ambiguous. We should raise tax on the rich. I will be back later. I'm renting a new apartment. Stolen jewel found by tree. Democracy is freedom for all. Two vehicles collide, one dies. Court tries shooting defendant. So which ones are vague? Which ones are ambiguous? So I leave you to do the exercises very quickly, and then we can move on. Now let's look at the senses of law. Here we want to understand the different ways in which we use the word law. Now we're looking at 7 senses. So it's not actually 6 senses, but 7. We have natural law, civil law, cultural norm, customary law, moral law, logical law, mathematical law, and divine law. So what is law? There's no single definition of law. It depends on which sense of law is in question. So we'll treat the different senses along with their definitions. Natural laws. We also call them scientific laws. Natural laws are scientific laws. They refer to statements describing the regularity or uniformity in the pattern of events or properties of things in the world. We form these laws based on past experiences. If, for instance, you observe that the sun always rises in the east and sets in the west, that is a natural or scientific law. The rising of the sun in the east and its setting in the west is a natural law or a scientific law. Other examples of natural law: planets revolve around the sun. The atomic weight of gold is 12. Animals survive on oxygen. Anything that has weight falls to the ground if suspended in the air. So these are natural or scientific laws. Then we have the civil or statutory laws, laws made by man to regulate human behavior, usually legal instruments accompanied by sanction and backed by force. Examples: commercial law, tax law, criminal law, corporate law, constitutional law, traffic law, human rights law, and so on. They must be obeyed by all citizens, and they are usually accompanied by prescribed punishment for disobedience. So civil or statutory laws are man-made laws for regulating human behavior in the various aspects of life in a community. Then we have cultural norms, social conventions, or social rules. These are common understandings about how we should do certain things, whether in traditional societies in the case of cultural norms or in modern societies in the case of social conventions. And any society, group, organization, or institution where we talk about social rules. Now, disobedience of norms is not normally punishable, but it attracts social disapproval. Examples include how we should dress, speak, receive visitors, worship, eat, observe public holidays, attend social functions, and so on. Then we have customary law. When a cultural norm becomes a civil law, certain cultural norms can be transformed into civil laws. In that case, it becomes statutory, and its disobedience becomes punishable. We have customary courts in rural areas. So those kinds of courts are more deeply enmeshed in local customs that have been transformed into laws. Examples of cultural norms that could become customary law. Example, the powers of a chief, traditional marriage rights and duties. Those things could become customary law. Then we have moral law. There is no universally accepted definition of moral law, but moral laws are about rules prescribing how we should or should not behave. Usually, for a rule of behavior to be regarded as a moral law, such a rule is universally respected. Examples: do not steal, kill, discriminate, or take another person's spouse, and so on. Then we have logical law. Logical law refers to rules for reasoning. The most common examples are deductive and inductive reasoning. You shall encounter them as you move on. Example of deductive reasoning: all men are mortal, Kofi is a man, therefore Kofi is mortal. That's deductive reasoning. Then we have mathematical laws. They are rules for mathematical operations. Example: never divide by 0. All the rules of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division are mathematical laws. Then we have divine laws, which are laws credited with a supernatural source. Examples depend on the religion in question. For example, in Christianity, there are laws about relating with God, praying, forgiving those who offend us, and so on. So let's sum up. At the end of this session, you should be able to identify factual statements that are implicit value judgments, distinguish metaphors from proverbs, understand vagueness, ambiguity, and equivocation, understand the various senses of law. Remember to do all your textbook exercises on metaphors, proverbs, vagueness, ambiguity, equivocation, and the senses of law. And of course, this video also shows you your slides. Now, some recommendations. This YouTube channel is dedicated to critical thinking lecture videos. So you would make it easy for yourself by hitting the subscribe button. Hit the subscribe button to be notified of your lecture videos for some other units. So the website on which you are watching this video right now contains a subscribe button. So hit it so that when other videos emerge, you will know that they have emerged. Watch your lecture videos regularly. Buy and read your textbooks regularly. Do the exercises in your textbooks. Check your Sakai platforms regularly for updates, announcements, and assessments. So that's the end. I think we've done quite well for today because we treated a multitude of topics. So at this point, I think we have to stop, and we look forward to the next topic. All right, goodbye, and I wish you a very good week.